Very good afternoon. First of all, thank you for coming to CSIS and to have this discussion that we co-organize with USINDO on one particular issue that I think have been subjects of discussions and debates in Indonesia as well as in the United States. For Indonesia, the question of the relations between religion and the state, I think, actually at the constitutional level has been settled in day one of the Republic, on August 17, 1945. But of course, over the years, because of the social dynamics, politics, as well as this is one also subject that we will discuss today as I peruse through the slides that have been prepared by our two distinguished speakers. Demographic change, also something that needs to be taken into account, that would affect the way religion affects politics, and at the same time probably politics affects religion. And for that, we are very happy and very honored to have the two distinguished speakers. The first speaker coming all the way from Washington, D.C. to explain probably what's going on in the U.S. As we know that I think we all over the globe are confused with what happened in the U.S. So you are. And probably you are also confused with what has been happening in Indonesia, in the past few years. Our first speaker will be Dr. Peter Mandeville. He is a senior research fellow at Georgetown University's Berkley Center and a Brookings Institution non-resident senior fellow. He is also a professor of international affairs at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University, where he previously served as co-director of the Ali Fural Ak Center for Global Islamic Studies and of the Center for Global Studies. Dr. Mandeville's research focuses on the comparative study of religious authority and social movement in the Muslim world, with an emphasis on youth groups, transnational networks, and new media. His publications include, among others, Islam and Politics, that was published in 2014, Global Political Islam in 2007 and 2011, and Transnational Muslim Politics, Reimagining the Ummah, 2001. He holds the degrees from the University of St. Andrews and the University of Kent, and has studied at the American University in Cairo. Our second speaker, I believe, need no more introduction, but I have to introduce Professor Azumardi Azra, who has a global reputation for promoting international academic exchange and cross-cultural and cross-religious dialogue. He is a senior professor of Islamic history and culture and former rector at Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University of Jakarta, and graduate school of the university, and studied at Columbia University in USA. And I don't know why it is here, but it is stated here that Professor Azumardi Azra was born in Western Sumatra. West Sumatra. So this is, I think, very important for USINDO and CSIS to put it here. That's a kind of an identity, aspect that probably Pa Azra would touch upon as well. Yeah. He wrote The Origins of Islamic Reformism in Southeast Asia in 2004, that revealed a long history of East-West cultural exchange. Now, because it's going to be very long to read all the achievement of Pa Azumardi Azra, but I think it has to be mentioned that President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono awarded him in 2005 the Bintang Mahaputra Utama, the highest decoration for a civilian in Indonesia. And in 2017, Japanese Emperor Akihito and Prime Minister Abe awarded him the Order of the Rising Sun, gold and silver class, the highest decoration for Japanese and non-Japanese distinguished figures. Oh, CBE. So he's a very distinguished member of the UK, award that only being granted for very special figures from across the globe in 2010. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Peter Mandeville first, 25 minutes to share with us his thoughts on religion and politics in the United States. You may use the podium, or you want us from here? Either way.
I can sit here if it's okay. It's more of a conversation that way. Thank you very much, Phillips, and thank you for your partnership and hosting of this event. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be back in Jakarta after some years, and it's an enormous pleasure and honor to share the stage with Sir Azumardi Azra, who I've known him for almost 20 years. One of my very first friends when I made a visit to Indonesia for the first time almost 20 years ago, and someone from whom I have learned enormously over the years. The topic that we have today is, I think, a very significant one, as Philip said, because obviously in the United States today we have many social and political issues that are driving discussions and debates in my country, in which religion and debates about religion are playing a role. Of course, in recent years in Indonesia, you have experienced some of the same, but not only in my country, in your country, all around the world, we've seen over the last decade an upsurge in various forms of populist politics, various forms of new forms of nationalism, and various debates and discussions that seem to sharpen differences between groups in society. And religion often is one of the issues that comes into the picture. So I think even though today we're discussing Indonesia and the United States, we're also at some level talking about a global phenomenon. And I think it's useful to have the opportunity to compare and contrast the experiences of our two countries in order to begin to understand what's happening at a more global level. For me, this is a slightly odd topic because usually I speak about religion in the Muslim majority world, and I'm not usually asked to reflect on my own country. So in a sense, this is a therapy for me. I get to talk to you about some of the things that I'm seeing and experiencing in the United States and look forward to learning from you and how you think about them. I want to begin just by providing some basic information for those of you who may be less familiar with the religious demography, the religious composition of the United States. This pie chart will show you very clearly that the United States is in some respects quite diverse. You see lots of different colors there. But when you look at the blue side, which represents people who identify as Christian, you see that it occupies the vast majority of the chart. There are, of course, major differences within American Christianity, differences between evangelical and mainline Protestants. Protestant Christians are the largest religious group in the United States, but with also a strong Roman Catholic community, as well as smaller Christian denominations such as the Mormons and Orthodox Christians. You'll notice perhaps also that the see if this is a pointer. Yes, you'll see that, whoops, excuse me. You'll see that things are broken out in terms of race and ethnicity as well. And I think this is an important point because even though African Americans are overwhelmingly Protestant, and even though you have a significant and growing Latino Protestant Christian community, black Protestants and white Protestants generally don't worship together. They're not engaged with each other in society and politics. So there is a common point of religious connection, but the traditions and practices of overwhelmingly African American Baptist churches, for example, look very different from what Methodist and Baptist Christianity looks like within white America. So I think it's important to bring out these racial differences. When we get to the non-Christian side of things, the two largest groups are Jews at about 2% of the American population, and Muslims that come in at approximately 1% of the US population today. These are some charts that I'll put up very briefly from the Pew Research Center in Washington, D.C., which has done extensive studies of American demography. And Pew is very good because they look at trends over time. One thing I think that's interesting to note here is that when you look between 2007 and 2014, these lines show you which groups are increasing and which are decreasing. The single largest change in American Christianity, according to Pew, since 2007, is a significant increase in the number of people identifying as unaffiliated. Now, this category, unaffiliated, refers to people who, on surveys, identify themselves either as atheists or agnostics or nothing in particular. Right? And so the single largest increase has actually been within that unaffiliated category. Catholics, evangelical Protestants, mainline Protestants have all actually seen slight decreases. Non-Christian faiths, particularly Muslims, actually have increased during that same period. This is a chart with lots of little numbers that you can't read very well and will probably take a lot of time to go through, but this is an interesting set of data that tries to understand patterns in American religiosity by asking people from different religious groups how often they undertake daily prayer, and attend religious services. And so from these charts, again, this is all available online. If you're interested to know more about it, you can go to the Pew Research Center and get this. So let me get to the heart of the points that I want to raise, since we have only a short time available to us. I want to talk a little bit about some trends and things going on within evangelical Christian communities, and then on the next slide I want to talk about some issues that have come up around Islam and Muslims in the United States. As is well known by now, evangelical Christians, particularly conservative evangelical Christians, which is the largest subgroup within evangelical Christianity, voted very strongly for Donald Trump in the 2016 election, and is probably the group within the United States that has stayed most closely loyal to him since that time. It's been remarked as, in some ways, very strange because Donald Trump has never identified as a Christian, much less as an evangelical Christian. Indeed, much of what is known and or suspected about his lifestyles suggests that he's not necessarily someone who's very closely in tune with the values of evangelical Christians, as most of them would describe them. And so it strikes some people as very strange that there's this alignment between Trump and evangelical Christians. I actually think that this is not too strange if you simply think of it as a purely transactional relationship. Evangelical Christians are using him, and he is using them, and they both know it. Evangelical Christians are using him because they want to support someone who is not part of the standard Washington political establishment. They have strongly lost trust in career politicians, and they wanted someone that they could rely on to advance certain policies that they care about. And so essentially what has happened is a bargain between Trump and evangelical Christians, where they provide strong, unwavering support for him, and he works to push their agendas politically, even when those agendas are built around issues that the president has never expressed any interest in himself. What are some of those issues? First and foremost, evangelical Christians are looking for Trump to change the composition of the Supreme Court in the United States in a way that would institutionalize a conservative majority on that court in the hope of overturning the landmark 1973 Roe versus Wade ruling, which guaranteed women in the United States the right to have an abortion. This issue has been the standard bearer of evangelical Christians for decades now, and they sense that with Trump, with the possibility that a good number of the Democratic or liberal justices on the court may be retiring soon, that there's the opportunity for Trump to appoint justices that would perhaps overturn that ruling. In a related issue, they are looking for some possible changes to earlier rulings that pave the way for same-sex marriage to become law in the United States. Evangelicals have also been very interested in the pushing the agenda of religious freedom, but a very expansive and broad conception of religious freedom. Usually religious freedom has been understood in the United States as something about the freedom to worship, that everyone should be able to practice their religion. The kind of religious freedom that many evangelical Christians are pushing now goes beyond just issues of worship. If we have to translate it into Islamic terms, where you have a difference between ibadat and mu'amalat, right? The aspects of religion that are about worship and those aspects of religion that are about social affairs and social transactions. Evangelical Christians are looking to move religious freedom from ibadat to mu'amalat, more specifically around things like giving people the right, like business owners, the right to deny service to people who hold values or practice lifestyles that they disagree with on religious grounds. So we had this very famous case, for example, with a man who ran a bakery, and someone who was going to be married to a person of the same sex came into the bakery and asked for a wedding cake to be made, and the owner of the bake shop said, "No, I won't do that because I don't agree with two men getting married, and so I won't perform that service for you." And the person who was asking for the cake sued, made a court case against him on the basis of discrimination, saying that their civil rights were violated, and this went through our court system, reaching eventually the Supreme Court, which came down with a complicated response that seemed to side mostly with the owner of the cake shop, actually, and this gave some satisfaction to evangelicals. More recently, we've heard a lot of talk, including from Trump himself, about changing something called the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment, which is named after our former president, Lyndon Johnson, before he became president, is a law which prohibits non-governmental organizations in the United States. Those organizations incorporated under what is called Statute 501c3 of the U.S. Tax Code, and this is basically means you're a charity. You're a non-governmental organization with charitable status. This law forbids any organizations like that from engaging in political campaigns, from engaging in behavior that is partisan in nature. And the idea here is that entities that are charitable and get tax benefits because they're charities should not be engaged in endorsing or raising money for political candidates. Almost all churches in the United States are incorporated under this 501c3 status, which is one reason why in churches in the United States you don't hear the minister or the preacher in the front of the church openly endorsing or suggesting that their parishioners vote for particular candidates. Even if they might have very clear political views, the fear is that if they engage in that kind of speech, they may lose this tax status that they have. There's been an effort afoot now to get rid of or modify the Johnson Amendment that would then allow churches to openly endorse political candidates and potentially raise money on their behalf, something that I think Trump, of course, sees as being very beneficial to him, given the role that churches have played in support for him. Conservative Christianity has also been influential in U.S. foreign policy, particularly with a number of issues of late relating to Israel, the moving of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the complete cutting off of U.S. funding for the United Nations Works and Relief Agency, which provides crucial basic needs and services to the Palestinian populations, defunding the Palestinian Authority itself, and closing down the U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem, which used to operate as something as an informal U.S. diplomatic mission to the Palestinians, a symbolic way to essentially cut ties completely between Washington and Palestine. There's also the issue of funding for public health programs in U.S. foreign assistance. There's a lot of millions and millions of dollars used to fund public health programs in the developing world, some of which include issues like reproductive health. And so under the Obama administration, more comprehensively than ever, there's been a complete removal of any funding in U.S. public health programs abroad that involve, for example, the provision of contraception. Muslims and Islam in U.S. politics. As I'm sure you will have noted and read in the news, there's been a marked increase in Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment, strange conspiracy theories that you hear coming out of particularly the political right about the idea that not just that Islam and Islamic militant groups are trying to attack the United States, but rather that representatives of groups like the Muslim Brotherhood are trying to infiltrate the U.S. government and to change American laws to bring them into conformity with Sharia law, to a point where you've had several states in the United States pass local laws which ban Sharia law. This is very strange because no one in those states has been asking for Sharia law or advocating for bringing in Sharia law, but yet they still have felt the need to proactively pass a law that makes Sharia illegal. And this gives you a sense, something of a sense of the role that Islam is playing politically in the United States now. It's reached a point, I think, where with respect to certain wings of the political right in the United States, expressing anti-Muslim sentiment is a way that you prove your credentials on the political right. Right? It's a way that you constitute yourself as part of a certain political group. And there's something parallel, conversely, going on the political left, where in the face of Trump's anti-Muslim statements, you see many on the political left reaching out to and embracing Muslims and trying to kind of talk very proudly about how comfortable they are with Muslims and how much they want to defend and support Muslims. So you have this strange parallel process of Islamophobia and Islamophilia going on in the United States at the same time on two different sides of the political spectrum. We've also seen marked changes within the political orientation of American Muslims. We don't know much about the political behavior of American Muslims prior to around 2000, but what evidence we do have suggests that a slight majority of American Muslims voted primarily for the Republican Party, which is not surprising when you think about it. This was pre-9/11. This was before Islam had become a sort of issue of such focus and debate in the United States. And American Muslims, by and large, are well-integrated, middle-class, pro-business, and socially conservative, which generally equals Republican. Fast forward to the present day, and overwhelmingly American Muslims support and come out for Democratic candidates, given the broader politics around Islam that has emerged. So on the face of it, much of the developments around Islam and Muslims seem to be rather negative, that the trend is problematic, both in terms of public attitudes and the politics of it, but I think there are a couple of positive things that are going on that are maybe a silver lining in an otherwise stormy sky. One is that you're starting to see very interesting coalitions emerging between Muslim American communities and other groups that feel themselves to be the target of discrimination and exclusion under Trump. So you see American civil rights groups working with organizations that advocate on behalf of Latino immigrants in the United States, who work also in collaboration with the Black Lives Matter movement. So you have this broader coalition of people of very diverse backgrounds coming together in solidarity to work against the current president. I think the present moment in the United States is also the moment that is helping to do some healing that has been needed for a long time within the American Muslim community, where for decades there's been a divide between African American Muslims, who represent about 20 to 25% of the American Muslim population, and immigrant Islam. Now, in many ways, it's the African American tradition of Islam that has the strongest claim to be a uniquely American indigenous expression of Islam. A very specific history grounded in race relations and the legacies of slavery. And immigrant Muslims, immigrant Islam, which began to arrive mainly in the 1960s, there's been this division because there's been a tendency of a sense of religious, and I think to some extent also racial superiority within immigrant Muslim communities that look at the traditions and practices of African American Islam and dismiss it as authentic. Sort of telling black Muslims, you don't really know the religion. We're from the Middle East, say. We know Islam, and so you need to do Islam the way we do if you want us to accept you as Muslims. Now that immigrant Muslim communities have found themselves on the receiving end of Islamophobia and discrimination, there seems to be more of the basis of a common conversation between the two groups. Closing thoughts. Don't hear me please to be saying that Christians in the United States support Trump universally. It's certainly the case within conservative evangelical Christianity. But there are faith leaders, Christian faith leaders, that have also been at the forefront of opposition to the current president. You may have heard something about the tragic protests that we had in the city of Charlottesville, Virginia, just an hour or so from where I live, in August 2017, where neo-Nazi groups marched openly, carrying torches, chanting fascist Nazi slogans. Protests ensuing the next day, in which a young woman was tragically killed. American Christian leaders were at the forefront of opposition against those right-wing, alt-right protests. And religious groups are also at the forefront of organizing and advocating on behalf of immigrants and refugees and those at the southern border of the United States who have been largely abandoned or in many respects deeply mistreated by the federal customs and border patrol system. Christian leaders are at the forefront of trying to do something about that. And even evangelical Christianity, it's tempting to just think of that as a very sort of conservative pro-Trump space. There are actually politically progressive wings of evangelical Christianity in the United States that are reaching out to and making common cause with other Christians. On the Muslim side of things, as much as we've talked about the challenges and the deeply difficult situation that American Muslims face, it's also fair to say that you're starting to see a mainstreaming of Islam in American popular culture. Popular television shows now have Muslim characters in prominent positions, those kinds of things. It seems that Muslims are becoming viewed as now a kind of more standard part of the American social and cultural fabric. And I think that is generally, in terms of longer term trends, a positive thing. So thank you very much for your patience, and I'm looking forward to learning about the Indonesian context from my good friend and colleague.
Thank you, Professor Mandeville. Now, I'd like to invite Professor Azumadi Azra to share his thoughts.
I prefer to stand up in order not to be sleepy. Thank you very much, USINDO and CSIS, Mbak Ivana, and the Minang Filipino friends Pak Philip, senior saya, ada Pak Theo. Okay. Thank you very much again. First of all, I'm very happy to see you again, Peter, after a long 20 years. When you were still young, and I was still young also at the time. 20 years ago, can you imagine? Time flies. First of all, I think in some way, US is responsible for religious resurgence, including in Indonesia, including including responsible for the rise of new religious conservatism or identity politics, Islamic identity politics that is rising in Indonesia, even though I would suggest that Islamic identity politics is not selling in Indonesia, mainly because of the nature of Indonesian Islam, which is wasatiyah, moderate, inclusive. Probably some, people in Europe, some expert like Peter, love to call it as a syncretic Islam or something like that. Not like Wahhabi Islam of Saudi Arabia. So I would say that in Indonesia has been experiencing the rise of religious conservatism across the board. Not only Islam, but all the so-called state-recognized religions in Indonesia. We have 6 state-recognized religions: Islam, Protestantism, Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. I still remember in the second half of 1980s, I wrote a piece in Kompas about the rise of what you call as evangelical Protestantism, the rise of fundamentalist Christian fundamentalism in the US, the return of religion to politics since the time of Ronald Reagan, God bless you, and America as the city up on the hill, of course. Since the time, of course, you have religious resurgence in the US, and America is considered by the Harvard professor Diane Eck as religious America. I think the most religious Christians in the world. If you compare it with, let's say, with Christian in Europe, who are more relaxed, probably who are, many of them more and more abandon their belief in Christianity. So I think why people return to religion after modernization, and you remember scholar cum priest probably, Harvey Cox of Harvard, once argued that there is no place for religion in secular city. There is no place for religion in secular city. But in the 80s, religion actually returned to secular cities. This is what he said. That also the case in Indonesia. I would say that the rise of new conservatism in Indonesia, I think, has a lot to do with modernity. In 1970s, when the new government, new order government, President Suharto launched Indonesian modernization, economic development. Of course, in 1960s, early 1970s, expert loves to argue that modernity in the end would bring religion to I think to what is it to other to only would lose their role in society, would lose relevance religion. But in fact in Indonesia that's not the case. Now nggak bisa. Which one is this? So I would say nggak bisa Mbak. Itu kenapa? Which one? Nah, yuk, ya nomor berikutnya Mbak itu. Religious conservatism, the rise of conservatism, religious conservatism in Indonesia has a lot to do with improvement of Indonesian economy and education. Of course, improvement in economy and education lead to the rise of middle class, particularly Muslim middle class, who is at the core of new conservative, Muslim new conservative, with distinctive Islamic, the so-called Islamic lifestyle, creating conservative middle class. Religious conservatism rises across the board. I already mentioned among Muslim, Protestantism, Protestants, Catholics, Hindus, Buddhists, and Confucianists. But because Islam is the single largest religion in Indonesia, religious conservatism is most observable among Muslims. So since the time you came to Indonesia, people already asked me about the more and more widespread use of jilbab, for instance. I don't know, I cannot recall whether you also asked me the same question. Why? Now if you go to, let's say, traditional market in Java, now there is no difference between women in traditional market in Central Java or Eastern Java with women, Muslim women in traditional market in Bukit Tinggi, for instance. There is some kind of homogenization. And I think more than 80%, between 80% of these women traders in the market wearing hijab or jilbab. We call it jilbab. Hijab is in Indonesia refers to Muslim middle class women. Muslim hijab is more exclusive. Jilbab is more common for Indonesian Muslim women. Berikutnya Mbak. Now we have various kind of religious conservatism in Indonesia. The first one is ritual, related to ritual. Ritual religious conservatism, increased practice of rituals, inward-oriented religiosity. For instance, more interested in the practice of Sufism, for instance, or Islamic spirituality, sometimes mixed with other non-Islamic religiosity. And then socio-cultural religious conservatism, adoption of socio-cultural and economic practices considered to be more Islamic. Halal, for instance, everything should be mentioned. There should be a sign of halal. You know the sign of halal, H. Even I think increasingly people in Indonesia, not only Muslim but also non-Muslim, talk about halal kulkas halal, refrigerator, halal refrigerator, or water, or even egg. egg could be not halal, depending on the certain situation. So this is it. The third, political religious conservatism, oriented to the building of Khilafah or Daulah Islamiyah. Khilafah, of course, you know, 𝐷 Indonesia has been banned by Jokowi, President Jokowi 2 years ago. And Daulah Islamiyah, one single state entity, political entity, transnational, inspired or related to Ikhwanul Muslimin, Al-Qaeda or ISIS, DAIS, Daulah Islamiyah. Berikutnya, Mbak. Now, what is the socio-cultural impact, socio-economic, economic and political impacts? The first one, of course, I already mentioned increased or more widespread use of jilbab. One day, long time ago, the Japanese ambassador called me in the morning because he was very surprised. He was very worried to find her personal secretary wearing hijab, this Japanese ambassador. I said, take it easy. In Indonesia, the wearing of jilbab has nothing to do with radicalism, fundamentalism. But if she wears cadar, and then you have to expel her, you have to fire her. Cadar, you know, cadar, what is niqab or burqa? Full veil. Cadar. In my class, you know, at graduate school, you know, of course, Graduate School of State Islamic University, I said, there is no place in my class for women with cadar. If you love to wear cadar, you should not enter my class. Give me the Quranic verses or hadith as the basis of you wearing this cadar. They cannot produce. You cannot give me the ayah or the hadith because there is no ayat, there is no hadith. You know, making it obligatory for Muslim women to wear cadar. Okay. Widespread use of jilbab, humility, fashionable. There are many kinds of jilbab actually, Peter. I call it because of humility, yeah? Because they feel that Islam teach that women should wear jilbab because of they feel that they should keep their aurat, from harus menutup auratnya. Jadi hair is considered aurat. But in the Middle East, you know, of course, not only hair, women hair as aurat, even also the voice, female voice is considered aurat. That's why women are not allowed to recite Quran in mixed audience like this. For instance, you invite a woman to recite Quran here, it is not allowed. It is prohibited in the Middle East, but not in Indonesia. In Indonesia, women can recite Quran in mixed audience, among mixed audience. And then you have fashionable jilbab, which is hijab, usually among the Muslim women middle class, Muslim women middle class, and ideological jilbab, which is long, yeah, like used by, I think, by PKS members or Hizb-ut-Tahrir members or probably Tarbiyah members on campuses in Indonesia. Readoption of practices that have been discouraged because of modernity, like polygamy. Yeah. In the last 2 days, Mbak Clara langsung ketawa dia. We found pictures of one member of parliament with 3 wives. Ya, ada itu. And then after that, He slept, Habis itu tidur dia, slept in the proceeding. So this is, this new conservative teach our wives to find a new wife, a second or third wife of her husband, if her husband has been able to have extra income, Kalau rezekinya udah banyak harus dibagi. So, spread of adoption of the so-called halal or Sharia lifestyle. I already mentioned it. Anything Sharia, anything Sharia. Even though Peter, actually, of course, I'm not. I do not support the idea of the adoption of Sharia by the state. Sharia, should be conducted, privately by Muslims, because you practice Sharia. Muslim have to practice Sharia anytime, because Sharia is much wider in terms of law. For instance, Muslim like me cannot live without Sharia. For instance, you pray and then you practice Sharia. You take ablution. It means you mengambil wudu, ablution, and then it means you practice Sharia. And then if you get married, and then you practice Sharia, because peraturan ketentuan, because of regulation, technical regulation on this is Sharia or 𝐕𝐞𝐫 rather, 𝐕𝐞𝐫, the detailed regulation on various aspects of Muslim life. The only Sharia that are not adopted in Indonesia is hudud, of course hudud law, potong tangan dan pancung, ya kan? Atau zina itu yang kemarin ditolak itu, dibilang sama Ibu Clara ke Pak Jokowi, itu terlalu private katanya. Ya Bu ya. Stronger efforts to establish a more Sharia, more Islamic political oriented. Lanjut Mbak. Ada tadi yang satu, coba ke depan lagi Mbak. Terus sebelumnya. Ya, this is about sebelumnya apa Mbak? Sesudahnya. I think not typology. About Islamic political identity, religious conservatism and politics. Ada nggak religious conservatism and politics? Terus? Oh no, you don't have it. I don't know. It's strange. Religious conservatism is in the rise since the time of Jakarta province election. Remember 𝐷𝐞 case? I don't know why you don't have it. Which is supposed has lead to the rise of Islamic identity politics. Mass gathering everywhere, including I think also here, not far from here, 212 mass action. Remember, this is about 𝐷𝐞 and Jarod. I don't know whether you follow this. 𝐷𝐞 is a non-Muslim. He's of Chinese. He said that he is of a double minority person. He lost in the election in the second round or in the runoff of the election, and then people said that the winner of the election were the current governor, Anies and Sandiaga. Why they won the election? Because they use and abuse Islamic identity politics. But I said, remember that in the second round of the election, actually 𝐻𝐸 managed to gain 42% of total votes. 42% means that he gained 15% of non-Muslim votes and 27% of Muslim votes. Still, you know, big number of Muslim vote for 𝐻𝐸. Yeah. Religious conservatism was also apparent in the 2019, this year, election, presidential election. You can see the so-called the Alumni Association of 212. 212 refers to the big gathering, to support Anies, to oppose 𝐻𝐸. And then they actually use and abuse Islam in the political processes by conducting what they call as ijtima ulama, the gathering of the ulama, proposing vice presidential candidates to Prabowo, but Prabowo refused to accept, and he chose his own candidate, Sandiaga Uno. And so from this, but remember, the vice president candidate of Jokowi, in fact, also had actually, I don't know, you could call it mastermind or whatever of this 212, yeah? Because he also opposed. In fact, Pak Maruf Amin, Kiai Maruf Amin issued maklumat, not fatwa, but maklumat, something like that, announcement that Muslims should not elect 𝐻𝐸. Why? Because he has denigrated Muslims or Quran or something like that. So the so-called Islamic identity politics actually has divided, and then more and more people disengage themselves from this identity politics. I think probably after now, I think the number will, because remember 2 days ago, the police special detachment, anti-terror detachment 88 actually detained 6 people, 6 or 5. One of them is a professor at the Bogor Institute of Agriculture, who actually menyimpan Molotov bomb or something like that would be used in the big demonstration in the last few days in Jakarta. I think today there is also big demonstration by laborers in Indonesia. So this is actually the core of Islamic identity politics is in this area now. So that's why I'm not very worried about this Islamic identity politics in Indonesia. Why? Because I don't know, in Indonesia, Indonesian Muslim in general are very relaxed in terms of Islamic politics. Remember, in the legislature election, Muslim voters fought for Pancasila-based political parties. Yeah, the winners are all of them, PDIP, Golkar, Gerindra, apa lagi Pak, Demokrat, Nasdem, all are Pancasila-based political parties, not Islamic-based. Islamic-based political parties fail to gain significant votes. Remember, PKS gain only 8%, and PPP gain only 4%. Yeah. These two parties are Islamic-based political parties. So basically, you know, Indonesian Muslim were jilbab, but they campaigned for Ahok. Remember, they asked photocopy of KTP, ID card. I remember I met, ibu-ibu mother with her children, her daughters, to collect the photocopy of ID card in order to support Ahok. Remember, Ahok would run as an independent at the time, so he need photocopy, the copy of ID cards. So this is it. Even though I think we need to consolidate in my in my presentation, I said, even though the Islamic identity politics is in this area now, but at the same time we need to reconsolidate Islam wasatiyah Islam. Mana dia tuh, Mbak? Wasatiyah Islam. Terus ke belakang. Terus wasatiyah Islam, moderate Islam, inclusive Islam should be reconsolidated. And you, Muhammadiyah, of course, there is a lot of discussion that this organization have been infiltrated by the Wahhabi Salafi ideas, by supporters of Khilafah and Daulah Islamiyah. But now, of course, I think this organization, together with government, Indonesian government, I think have conducted several programs in order to counter this infiltration, including in, I think the audience now here, remember that now the government also, looking for the track record of, for instance, rector's candidate. Jadi rektor, calon-calon rektor itu dilihat. There are 2 cases, including also the rector candidates of rector at University of Indonesia. Whether they are contaminated by radical or not. Jadi itu misalnya langkah-langkah itu. Sekarang tidak bisa. There are some cases that dean and rector that would be inaugurated, the inauguration was cancelled because of evidence that the candidates have something to do with radical organization. Saya stop di situ. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Professor Azra. I think the 2 speakers have given us some highlights of what has been developing in the US and Indonesia. I think hearing from what Peter already mentioned, some aspect of his presentation sounds very familiar here in Indonesia. For example, when the conservative, Christian conservative evangelical in the US use Trump, and at the same time it's actually the conservative thing that they are using Trump. So we don't really know who's writing who, in that context, But I think it sounds familiar in Indonesia as well, as Azumadi Azra also mentioned. Secondly, I think, if I may, later, if there's no question from the audience, I have my question to Peter. What's going on with the youth? It seems to me that there has been a 2nd or 3rd generation of Muslim immigrants in the US. And now I think they are facing some sort of identity crisis because their parents might be practicing Muslims, and then they are, the 2nd generation or 3rd generation, they're exposed to a more secular school systems and pop cultures and so on. And then what's going on with this second or third generation of Muslim in the United States. I ask this because I once watched this documentary. It's called Taqwa Core. Taqwa Core. It's about a Muslim punk in the U.S. And it's very interesting, and it's too radical for me, to see how these young Muslims in the U.S. basically they are saying no to both sides, to the state, to the Christian, to the Muslims, and so on. And so they are roaming around as a punk in the U.S., denying their own religion. And then I believe it's a widespread among second or third generation of Muslims in the U.S. And Pak Azra, I think we all agree that the Islamic parties seems to fail to capture the energy of the conservative turn in Indonesia, because they failed to increase their votes, for example. But I do still think that there's some degree of rising conservatism in Indonesia. The fact that the Islamic parties fail to capture this is probably because, not only the conservative do not trust the parties, the political parties, many of us do not trust political parties as well. So the energy then spill over to the streets, and then they are looking for non-mainstream religious teachers. And that's, I think, why now these religious teachers, using YouTube and so on, they are more popular probably than Quraishi Hub or the mainstream, so-called ulama in Indonesia, and probably from Pak Azra as well. They are listening more and more to the kiais on YouTube that spread, hate and more conservative teaching of Islam. But that's another discussion. Now I'd like to open the floor for the audience. Please be short because we only have a very limited time. The lady in front, Ibu Susi, and the second lady as well. And from this side, the gentleman with the eyeglasses and with the white shirt. Please be very, very brief so we can accommodate more questions. And I'll open the second round.
Thank you for the presentations. My question is for Prof. Azra. I want to hear your opinion about the rising of political activism with the mothers, emak-emak, whether this actually a grassroots movement or there's some co-optations or generated from or organized. Thank you.
Yes, Ibu, please.
Yeah, thank you for the time. My question is for Pak Azra. In Indonesia, we have 5 religions: Hindu, Buddhism, Catholic, Christian, and Islam. Oh, Konghucu. Okay, 6 now. Regarding the discussion, the role of religion in politics, we know in Indonesia, very often politics is one package with the religion. And we know already that Islam is the best population here. Even we have 6, Islam in population is the biggest. It is in quantity, not in quality, sorry. Sometimes government is just keep silent about the politics party that on behalf of the religion. And very often also because the Islam, the best quantity in population, so Islam have the more priority compared with the other religion. I think it is not good or not equal treatment as Indonesian as republic should be with the same and equal with the other religion, because we are not few, or this one is the big population, this one is small minority population. It is cannot like that. I think you must suggest to the government, because you are a lecturer in University of Islamic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
My question for the commander of British Empire, Pak Azra. You seem too keen to promote the Wasatiyah Islam. Every time, everywhere, I attend the discussion where you are the speaker. I think I'm afraid that our over-exaggeration of this praise worsen our remarkable ignorance of the fact happening in the Middle East. My questions: do really people in Middle East and North Africa have a choice? Today's and the past, after the Second World War. You know, you say in the first part of your presentation that America is responsible to what happens in Indonesia. No, I think that is not limited to only Indonesia, maybe Muslim world in more general sense. You know, until today, United States still very their friendship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is still very good. And when we talk about Iran, we always refer to the collapse of Shah Iran. But we never talk about the toppling of Mossadegh, who was very democratic politician in the past, but the Western countries were not keen with him, and they toppled the Mossadegh. Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. You, please.
Terima kasih. Pertanyaan saya tujukan kepada Prof. Azra. Menarik tadi saya mendengar bagaimana kemudian Prof menyampaikan untuk mengimbangi politik konservatif keagamaan khususnya Islam di Indonesia itu dengan melakukan wasatiyah Islam atau Islam yang lebih damai, toleran, dan lain sebagainya. Tapi yang terjadi di saat ini di Indonesia adalah perkembangan propaganda radikalisme itu baik secara langsung ataupun secara sosial media itu sangat masif sekali. Nah, pertanyaan saya adalah apa langkah atau kiat-kiat yang lebih spesifik mengenai rekonsiliasi tentang wasatiyah Islam ini? Dan apakah kontranarasi terhadap radikalisme di Indonesia saat ini menurut Prof sudah berimbang atau masih ada tumpang tindih? Terima kasih.
Thank you. I think we have a lot of questions for Professor Azra, so I'll let you respond.
First, thank you very much for all the questions. First, I think the involvement of emak-emak or emak-emak is mothers in Indonesian politics recently. I think it is one of some indicators of the freedom of Muslim women enjoys in Indonesia. I think the freedom of Muslim women in this country is one of the most important distinction of Indonesian Islam. If you compare Indonesian Islam with somewhere else, Islam somewhere else, I think the freedom of Muslim women is one of the most important distinction. I remember one day we had a discussion at the House of Lords in London, Peter, and then we talk about the women ulama in Indonesia, the history and the tradition and the progress of women ulama in Indonesia in the House of Lords. And then one professor from India said that in India still, Muslim man can divorce his wife by only saying, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you 3 times. This is in accordance with the Syafi'i fiqh. Memang fikih Syafi'i dulu mengajarkan teach that laki-laki Muslim male can divorce his wife by only saying, 3 times I divorce you, 3 divorce you. But not in Indonesia. Indonesia, I cannot only say that to my wife, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. The divorce is not in effect. You have to divorce your husband or your wife only through, Islamic court. That's it. You have to bring your case. And now, 70%, more than 70% of cases in Islamic courts were brought by Muslim women to divorce their husband. Probably their husband, do not give sufficient livelihood or something like that, probably. But Muslim women in Indonesia is very empowered compared to Saudi Arabia. Remember, in Saudi Arabia, it is only recently that Mohammed bin Salman allowed women to drive herself, or to watch, to go to stadium, or now to have a bank account. Boleh sekarang, is it allowed now to have bank account? To travel. Only recently, but not in Indonesia. It has been things that taken for granted by Indonesian Muslim women. So I think this is because of activism, Ibu, because of political activism among Indonesian Muslim women. And then Ibu yang penanya yang kedua, I think first, if you said that Indonesian Muslim is big only in terms of quantity, not quality, I think this is questionable. Probably it is true 20 years ago, but now if you go everywhere, you can find many mosques. And then most Indonesian Muslim have to wait probably 20 years in order to be accepted to go for pilgrimage, because you have to list for pilgrimage to Ministry of Religious Affairs. Yeah. In some cases, in South Sulawesi, for instance, you have to wait 25 years in order to be accepted to go for pilgrimage. So you can see increased religiosity. There are many surveys, there are many research conducted by American professors or American researchers that Indonesian Muslim are more loyal to Islamic practices, Islamic ibadah, compared to a Muslim in the Middle East. I think in 1986, Professor Nikki Keddie of UCLA compared the practice of Friday prayer among Muslim male in Jakarta, Cairo, and Tehran. She found that the most regular, the most loyal Muslims to go to pilgrimage, to Friday prayer, have been Muslim in Jakarta, Muslim male in Jakarta. More than 90%. Pergi ke masjid, Bu. And in Egypt, only around 60%, and in Tehran, less than 30%. So I think we need to do research in this, not to do research. Another professor, Riaz Hassan, from Adelaide University, has conducted the same survey. Yeah. So Indonesian Muslims are more loyal, even though again Indonesian Muslim are more relaxed in terms of politics. Yeah. I don't think that Indonesian Muslims enjoy a special treatment from government or special privilege. Of course, it seems that Indonesian Muslims enjoy special privilege when they go for pilgrimage. It is administered by the Ministry of Religious Affairs. If you can imagine if the pilgrimage or umrah are conducted, are done, administered by private companies. Banyak sekali penipuan. There is a lot of, because this pilgrimage is a very, what is that? Yeah, very lucrative business. So it should be managed by government. But I think Indonesia is the only country in the world that gives equal treatment to the six recognized religion you mentioned. Indonesia is the only country that celebrate officially some major holidays, religious holidays. Not only Islam, not only Islam and Christianity, let's say that. We celebrate 5 Muslim major religious holidays. I think 4 Christianity holidays, and then 1 each for Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. I don't know, Peter, which country in North America or in Europe that also officially celebrate, let's say, Idul Fitri. Is there any country? No, not officially.
But for the build of the church, for the Christian, is very difficult.
Oh yeah, they give time, like in New York City, Muslim students, if let's say today is Idul Fitri and then you have examination, and then student, can do their examination at another day. So.
But for the build of church, for the Christian, it is limitation.
Yeah, that's a matter who are dominant in certain area. Kalau if in certain area the dominant the dominant demography is Muslim, probably it is difficult. Like probably in Bekasi, certain place in Bekasi, not on all Bekasi, But I also found, if in certain area of Indonesia, let's say in Nusa Tenggara Timur, for instance, if in certain area if the majority of the population are Catholics, it is very difficult for the Protestant to build their church, and also for Muslims. Benar itu. Kalau saya tahu, saya baru dari Maumere, itu romo-romo tuh mengeluh, ya kita susah bikin gereja di tempat-tempat yang mayoritasnya orang Protestan. Benar. So we need to, I don't know, saya kira we need to regulate this. Sama lah, di Bali juga begitu. Orang Islam in Bali, very difficult for them to build mosque, particularly after Bali bombing 1 and 2. I think that also the case. Now, I said that religious resurgence across the board, also among the Hindus. Sekarang orang Hindu tidak boleh orang Kristen menggunakan istilah-istilah Sanskrit terms for the names of churches or schools or whatever. Kan banyak itu kayak Atma Jaya, itu kan bahasa Sanskrit. You cannot use it now. Istilah-istilah kayak begitu itu in Bali. Because why? Because Sanskrit is considered as sacred language of the Hindus. Jadi begitu, Pak. Jadi tergantung dari siapa yang berkuasa in certain areas. Tentu saja tidak di seluruh areas. In many areas, there is no problem for Christian to build their own church. In many, But in some areas it is true. But the case terjadi tidak hanya among Muslim for Christian, but also for Muslim, for depending on the situation. But I think we don't have widespread cases of this. Yeah. Still isolated cases. Apa lagi? Wasatiyah Islam. Yeah. I think the future of Islam is Wasatiyah Islam. The future of Islam is Indonesian Islam, not Middle Eastern Islam. I don't know whether Peter agrees with me. I don't know. Because if you look to the west of Indonesia, to the Middle East, and also to Africa, and also to South Asia, give me one majority Muslim country that has bright prospect. Give me. Bisa nggak ngasih satu negara yang punya prospek yang bagus? Indonesia, of course, has its own problems. Ya. Punya. Tapi coba lihat apa yang terjadi. Look what happened in the Middle East. They are killing each other every day. In the Yemen, in Syria, in Syria, and also in Iraq, also in Libya. After 7 years of Arab Spring in 2012. Yeah. Okay. America is responsible. This is a joke. Yeah. Of course, America is not responsible. My point is that religious resurgence began in the U.S. with the rise of Christian evangelism. Yeah. Some of them, of course, Christian fundamentalism. Yeah. Ini yang itunya. So religion return to secular city, secular America. Itu intinya sebetulnya. No, not America. Indonesia is one of the very independent country vis-a-vis US. If you compare Indonesia with Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia is very dependent on the US in terms of military security. Egypt is very dependent on the US in terms of economy and security. But not Indonesia. We are not dependent on the US in anything. Yeah. Particularly during this Trump. In fact, Trump tends to ignore Indonesia. He has never visited Indonesia. Ya Pak Alan ya? I think he So I think Indonesia is in a good position vis-a-vis US now, compared to any other Muslim country, except probably Malaysia under Mahathir. Yeah. Propaganda, I think moderate Muslim, Wasatiyah Islam should be more active. Even though, of course, I would say that certain phenomena of Islamic conservatism is like fashion. Come and go. Like phenomena of hijrah. Now, some, celebrities say that now let's do hijrah. Hijrah means, they becoming more conservative. Yeah. But it's come and go. It's like fashion. Kadang-kadang dia datang, kadang-kadang hilang. So I would say that there is a sociological, anthropological mechanism in Indonesian Muslim society that in the end bring this certain aspect of Islamic conservatism to soften, let's say, to soften Islamic conservatism. Itu yang terjadi. Makasih deh.
Thank you. I did want to respond to your question about Muslim youth in the US, but I also can't resist getting into this conversation about the role of the US in causing things. I think I would push further. I would say that the US has been responsible for helping to cultivate environments that allowed for very conservative interpretations of Islam to arise. Because during the Cold War, the United States was very happy to have Saudi Arabia spending billions of dollars around the world because it was useful for US Cold War interests. In any country where there was a perceived communist threat, which included Indonesia for certain, the United States, maybe they didn't encourage it, but they were quite happy to have Saudi Arabia and the Gulf allies spending a lot of money. And now, 20 years later, you don't control always what that grows into. I'm writing a book right now on the Saudi Arabia's global export of Wahhabism, and more specifically the geopolitical dimensions of it. And I'm seeing more and more evidence of the history of this coming out. With respect to wasatiyah as the future of Islam, as you know, Pak Azra, in the Middle East, that term has a very specific meaning. Right? There's a particular intellectual movement that emerged in the 1990s called the Wasatiyah movement that has not done very well politically, because there were political parties that were founded in its name that contested elections and didn't do very well. And it was originally associated with people like Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi and a number of Egyptian scholars. And so I think for many Middle Eastern ears, hearing about wasatiyah as the future would sound kind of strange because they associate it with something very specific there. I think here you mean sort of centrist, justly balanced Islam in a more general sense. So we hear in my country a lot about Islam Nusantara. And it appears to us like a branding product that's being sold from Indonesia as a security device for countering violent extremism. Right? And so I feel often that in Washington, when we have visits from Indonesian officials, when they start talking about counterterrorism cooperation with the US, Islam Nusantara comes out. And I think this is a problem because it runs the risk of Indonesian Islam being perceived simply as a solution to terrorism rather than something that has value and intellectual substance on its own. So I would hate the world's reception and appreciation and encounter with Islam Nusantara to occur primarily through the lens of security and counterterrorism, because then it will become tainted. What I'm waiting for, though, is for someone to actually fully elaborate and explain to me the program, the intellectual program of Islam Nusantara. I understand roughly what it means, but I want to hear more about the substance. And I would love to see the idea of this becoming part of a broader global discussion about Islam. So often in my years in Washington since 9/11, I feel like my colleagues, again, security people in Washington, look around the world for moderate Islam. And they find Indonesia, and they say, oh, look at those nice moderate Indonesian Muslims. Maybe we can transplant Indonesian Islam to the Arab world and get rid of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and groups like that. And I hate this model. It's this very simplistic, like you're going to lift it up and just move it over and put it down. And it fails to recognize that the characteristics of Islam in Indonesia are an organic product of the very specific historical and cultural aspects of this society. Well, I mean, Indonesia is so diverse, Indonesian societies, you have to say in plural, I think, right? And so you can't just transplant that. Finally, I think an issue that we're not talking enough about is that the geopolitical, the global conversation in recent years has been framed so much in terms of Islam and the West. Are Islam and the West compatible? The West is in decline. we are entering a post-Western world order, no question. So I think the question you need to be contending with, you in Indonesia here, is the question of Islam in the East, more specifically China. Don't worry about whether Islam can be compatible with the West. Ask questions about how China is going to come to terms with Islam. If we look at the grand plan for the Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative that stretches across China's western provinces, and we know what China is doing to Muslim communities in its western provinces. It stretches across its western provinces into Central Asia, into the Middle East. So China is about to have an encounter and a reckoning with Islam of its own that I think is going to have major consequences for both that entire swath of the world from Asia across to the Middle East. And so I think we need to start having, and we need to recognize this and start having conversations about the encounter between China and other rising Asian economies and Islam in the Muslim world. And I've completely ignored the question that you actually asked me, which is about trends among Muslim youth in the US. I see two things going on. First, unlike their co-religionists in Europe, immigrant Muslim youth have actually been very well integrated into American society, generally speaking, unlike Muslim communities in Europe that have struggled since the first generation in the 1960s to integrate into European societies. American immigrant Muslims generally came to the country with higher levels of education and skills and have become broadly middle class and well integrated. So bizarrely, paradoxically, what's been happening over the last 10 years can be described as a process of de-integration, right? Where Muslims that were quite well integrated into America suddenly became an object of scrutiny and surveillance and political utility after 9/11, which has caused a light to be shined on them, and suddenly their Muslimness is very present. And so there's that process of dealing with being focused on, being pulled out, and becoming the object of interest and discussion that American Muslims are having to deal with. And part of that, and I think this relates, Phillips, to the point you were raising, there are many American Muslims that are responding to this by embracing a stronger religious identity, right? As they see their Muslimness being framed as something dangerous and being rejected, their impulse is not to hide their religion, but rather to more confidently embrace it and say, yes, I am a Muslim. And that's a way to push back against that. But what I think is very interesting and very different from Europe is that when European Muslims were forced to do that, their politics became, I think you could say, more Islamist, right? The second generation European youth that became more politically engaged gravitated towards the European branches of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Jamaat-e Islami movement from South Asia. Whereas politically confident and engaged Muslims today are actually engaging their identity, more broadly through social justice-oriented agendas that are trying to work in collaboration with other groups in American society that have similarly been discriminated against because of their ethnicity or race, in order to collaboratively face this challenge. And to me, that's a good thing.
Thank you. Now, we have reached the end. The time is limited, but I think the two speakers give us so many food for thoughts, especially the question of back to the square one, relations between religion and politics, religions and the state, not only in the US, but I think also in Indonesia. And secondly, also, I think both speakers challenge us in the audience and probably CSIS to always think about the nature of our Islamness, if I may. Being a moderate Muslim country, what does it mean? And then how it shapes our politics and our democracy for some years to come. We have survived so many challenges before in this regard, but I think challenge now it's more difficult because not only Indonesia is facing the growing conservativeness, but across the globe we see a similar phenomenon. Lastly, I think if I may, to close this discussion, the great philosopher Nietzsche proclaimed in his book, a few decades ago, saying that God is dead. And then when Nietzsche died, God says, Nietzsche is dead. And now actually God is winning because people are returning to religion, in terms of politics, in terms of their association and their identity. So God is still the winner in this regard. Thank you for coming to CSIS. We look forward to seeing you again in another event.